Katoa. Welcome and greetings. Welcome to this meeting of the Finance and Council Controlled Organisations Committee. We have two speakers for the public forum today speaking together. We've got Murray Schofield and Grant Craig from the Otago Excursion Train Trust. So you're welcome to come up now. Just turn your microphones on with the wee button in the middle. I'm sure your memory's good from last week. Welcome, Murray and Grant. You have 5 minutes, and then if you're open to questions, and there are questions, we can have another 5 minutes for them. So, welcome.
Councillors, there remains a lot of unanswered questions around the financial requirements and the right operating mechanism for the future of Dunedin Railways. First, the financial requirements. In our earlier submission, we were asked what we believed was the financial commitment required for the maintenance of the Torrey Gorge track. Our answer then was $10 million over 10 years. It still is that amount today. On behalf of the Otago Excursion Train Trust, thereafter I'll call it the Trust, I would like to submit a track report commissioned by the Otago Excursion Train Trust and undertaken by Robert Storm. Robert Storm is a former project engineer with Kiwi Rail, now operating as a consultant trading as Rail Ing Services. His plan for the ongoing maintenance for the track was expenditure in year 1, $2 million, year 2, $1.5 million, year 3, $1 million, then progressively down to zero by the end of the 10-year period. Following this structure will ensure that the track maintenance should be sustainable from income after the 10-year period. This should allow higher track speeds, therefore gaining better efficiency. One of the important aspects of Dunedin Railways is to connect with the communities that support the train. Therefore, we, the Trust, believe it is essential that the train utilises the full distance of the track to Middlemarch. I'd like to make comments regarding the DCH report in attachment A. The storage workshop budget of $800,000. This figure, in our opinion, is short of what is required and would need to be revisited. One option if the Trust operated the line is to utilise its charitable organisation status to access funding sourced from community grants and maybe government funding. The Trust has already looked at options for building and land leasing or purchase to build a workshop, but so far we've gone no further than that. We also note that the cost allocated to governance is high and there may be other options and cost savings by looking at alternative methods. Dunedin Railways in the past have not had any issues obtaining regulatory approval, as NZTA works very closely with rail operators for the maximum benefit of all. Dunedin Railways operation has had a good relationship with NZTA, plus a good record for safety and safety improvements. I'd like to make some further comments on the recruitment of a team. Recruiting a team of skilled people will have to be carefully planned, and it's likely that the salary expectations at this time will be higher. There are skilled people out there, and using the contacts that the Trust has, we are sure that a roster of good people can be assembled. The Trust has intimated on a number of occasions that within our organisation and using the contacts within the wider New Zealand rail operators, that the Trust is more than capable of operating the railway. The Trust has always been involved in planning, marketing and running excursions. Over the years, Dunedin Railways took over what had been historically started with the Trust members. More recently, at the very end of the 2021 season, the Trust seized the only opportunity available to run an excursion to Oamaru, marketed it with a competitive price structure, The trip was sold out. 258 out of 260 seats were sold in a matter of days. All this was done on a shoestring budget using only social media advertising. The future looks bright, but it has challenges. But there are no better hands to entrust the operations to than those that know how to run a railway and that know the most about it. And that, councillors, is the Otago Excursion Train Trust. Thank you.
Thanks, Murray. I've got a question so far from the Mayor. Any other questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Kia ora kouroa, thank you for coming. And just interested, you were talking about a situation where the trust were to operate the line. I'm only paraphrasing slightly, I think. And I know that there was a business case submitted by the trust that has subsequently been withdrawn. Is there any work? Has there already been any work done since then around what such a model might look like?
No, we withdrew that business plan, but we haven't gone any further forward in regards to setting a budget or looking at the financial information. We would need, obviously, to do that.
So in that case then, from a timing point of view, is it feasible for such an outcome to be implemented this coming summer, do you think?
I think it could be, depending on when the summer started. I'm assuming that it's probably looking at maybe a Labour weekend start.
But how long? I guess my question is, how long do you think it would take you to put together another proposal?
2 to 3 months.
Thanks.
Sorry, Councillor Walker, then Councillor Raddick.
Thank you, Murray and Grant, for coming in. I just need some clarification. You talked about at the beginning the track maintenance, 2 million over 10 years, and you then alluded to some figures, then suggested that you would get the track maintenance down to 0. How's that possible? At what point is a requirement for no track maintenance?
There would be within, well, do you want to answer that, Grant?
It doesn't mean no track maintenance, it means it's sustainable with income, from income. That's what Murray was referring to.
Yeah, it seems to me there's two proposals or concepts on the table currently, which is the train running up and down the main trunk line, and that is kind of already there, ready to happen. But does that not involve the train? Does that involve the Excursion Train Trust?
It's all one, running up the gorge. Before COVID came along, Dunedin Railways had running rights through to Oamaru, to Mosgiel and up the gorge. The majority were up the gorge because that's where the scenery was. That's what the cruise ships and the customers wanted, the spectacular Tairi Gorge. But we also wanted to tap the market through to Waiteri and to Oamaru. I must say the option of Kia Rail worked fine under mothball to Waiteri because it was weekends. If you had got rid of the Tairi Gorge, wanted to run just on Kia Rail's track other than weekends, the Dunedin Railways would have real trouble because you're interfering with their track maintenance, their freight trains. They have priority because it's their track.
Yep. So what you're really wanting and talking about is the track up to Middlemarch, and there's quite a lot of work obviously to be done about that. We've heard quite often about this track maintenance, and it's really good to have a solid figure that is substantiated, because there's been a range of figures bandied about. So, but that could happen, because it's not going to, I imagine, or so will as soon as you start spending money on that track, will that track then be instantly available? Because I imagine not, but,
It's available now. You can run trains through the middle of March.
right,
But if you want to start running more regularly, you have to put some money into it.
right.
And so for the last 2 years, there's been stuff or maintenance on the track other than through to Hindon. They've only just done enough between Hindon and middle March to keep the line able to operate. So it's just making it more sustainable for running more trains.
And sorry to be a pain, but could you explain the nuance of difference between able to operate and able to carry passengers up and down there? Because you can run a train up to Middlemarch right now, but you can't be carrying a trainload of passengers. Is that right?
Currently, they only have an operating licence from NZTA to run through to Hindon, but it's just a matter of doing a risk assessment and checking your risks for going through to Middlemarch. So it could be done next week, really.
Right. And if it passed that risk assessment, we could be running tracks to Middlemarch, I mean trains to
Councillor,
Middlemarch.
Councillor, I just want to wind you in there if I can. We've got 3 more questions and we're already going to be over time, so if you don't mind, if you want to talk about it later, that's fine. But
For the 5 minutes, you mean? Yeah.
well, we're over 5 minutes already and we've got 3 more questions. So, Councillor Geary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, gentlemen. And my question's around cruise ship passengers, because the premise is that there's an expectation that we'll get crews back at the pace and volume that we had before. Is that part of your consideration, that there's an expectation that it will be back at the same volume as before?
No, I don't believe we will. And I've got no basis or data to base that statement on, but I just have my assessment of it is that it is going to take a while till we come back to that same level as what we had.
That was my concern, and thank you for clarifying that.
Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Chair. Kia ora, gentlemen. I think my question is a follow-up to that, because we've been asked in this paper to make an urgent decision about whether we should be gearing up for international tourism versus running a limited operation of maybe 2 to 3 services per week. And in your opinion, which would be the most viable for the 22-23 season?
The most viable would be to have to deal with the local tourism market. Because we have no idea actually whether any cruise ships will return or whatever, but we will be able to assess the situation very quickly and be able to provide a service at a moment's notice, more or less.
Cruise ships aren't going to come back like they used to. It's going to be a different world, and we have to cater for that different world. One of the restraints that I think that we'll have is that now Dunedin Railways hasn't been operating for 2 years. Going down to Port Chalmers to pick up cruise ship passengers from the wharf is going to be so much harder than what we used to. So we need to rethink that market. We need to keep our numbers of trains down and utilise the same services for cruise ships and FIT people.
Councillor Staines, final question.
Just a couple of quick questions. Firstly, if the track was in normal operating condition, so maintenance up to date, what would the figure for maintenance be a year?
About 200,000 a year.
And for the trust to operate the train, if the council decided we would offer that opportunity back again, I assume as part of that council would need to put forward the capital to do the catch-up maintenance.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, I have those reports here. Will I leave them here in case someone wants them?
Yes, that would be really good actually.
There should be a copy for everyone.
Oh yeah, certainly. I'll give them to Ms Sullivan and she can pass them around and save a copy for the Chief Executive too, if that's okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate you coming in. Okay, well, we're now at the stage where we'll start the meeting proper. I have had an apology from Councillor Vandervis and from Councillor Hall, who I believe is slowly recovering in hospital, so he's improving, but it's slowly. So have I got a seconder for that? Councillor Staines, thank you. I'll put the apologies. All in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you. I'd also like to confirm the agenda with the following alterations, that item 12, the reports of the Dunedin City Holdings Group companies and Dunedin Rail, be taken before item 10, and we've also got the inclusion of a new item 13, which was deferred from yesterday's infrastructure meeting, which is the ORC resolution. Yeah, not resolution. Submission. This is long COVID, and that's seconded by Councillor Walker. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you. Now, I'd just like to remind you of your declarations of interest, and I also just welcome, we've got Councillors Wiley and Houlihan on Zoom, so if anyone's looking at the big picture and can't see them, they are there. So is there any changes to the interest register? Has anyone had any changes? Okay, well, with that, I would just like that we confirm the proposed management plan for elected members on the declaration of interest. Got a second to Councillor Staines. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you. I'd also like to move from the Chair that we confirm the minutes of the Finance and Council Controlled Organisations Committee meeting, which was held on the 8th of March. Do I have a second to Councillor Staines? Thank you. Any comments? I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you. Now, item 6. We've got the resolutions of the Finance and Council Controlled Organisation meetings. Mr Logie, any comments? None. Any questions of that? 3 items on there. Okay, well, with that, and Councillor Staines is willing to second, I'm happy to move. Any discussion? I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you. Now we're Part A reports. Item 7, the Finance and Council Control. Oh, sorry, no. 8. 7, is it? Getting confused. Yep, sorry. This is the Forward Work Programme. Any questions? Any comments? Councillor Elder has said she's willing to move, and Councillor Staines is willing to second. Any discussion? I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. That's carried. Thank you. Now the finances for the year ending 31st of March. Would you like to speak? For the period, yeah. For the 9 months. Mr Logie, would you like to speak to it?
Just a couple of comments, Chair. Again, always refer to the graph page on page 35, particularly the cash flow and the capital expenditure. So obviously capital expenditure is tracking relatively close to budget. And the cash flow, which is really interesting, again, I commented on it the previous month, that the graph just about mirrors what happened in the previous year, which I think is a good thing. Obviously, the operating surplus is slightly above budget, but again, still in a deficit position. Just for the benefit of members, we've just in the process of finalising the April financial report, and CapEx has hit $110 million for the year to date for the 10 months ending April. So happy to take any questions.
I've got one, Gavin, and it was just around the CapEx. I sort of asked the same question last month, but I see for the year to date, while the CapEx is looking extremely good, and that's really thanks to Three Waters spend, I see city development, and I realise they're much smaller budgets, but some 7.4% of the budget's been sent, 18% in Parks and Rec, 27% in... Oh no, so 27% in Parks and Rec. Some of those figures, waste and environmental, 31%. Does that concern us at all?
So, if councillors recall, this budget was a fairly ambitious budget, but certainly overall we're tracking higher than we ever have before across the groups. And obviously what we'll do is, as part of the deliberations, we'll present a 3-year program for the capital plan. So what we'll do is we'll have what we think the forecast will be for the current financial year, obviously how that then rolls through to next financial year, and then year 3 of the 10-year plan. So that'll allow councillors to see where potentially projects or the delivery of projects being delayed and how that's going to flow through to the next 3 years. So the Mosgiel Pool, for example, it took a little while to get it up and running, but now that it's in delivery, what you'll see is that there'll be a slight underspend this year, but that underspend will flow through to the next 2 years.
Any other questions? Someone like to move? I'm happy to move, but Councillor Staines? Okay. Second it. Councillor O'Malley, thank you. Would you like to speak to it, Councillor Staines?
Just to give thanks to the teams with the terms of capital expenditure. It's great to see that we are tracking well against the budget, and that means that the work that we had scheduled to be done is being done, and that's a really good result.
Councillor Elder?
Well, in that space of capital expenditure and I want to congratulate infrastructure and Simon Drew in developing project management groups that enable work to be developed as projects, and having people across this council to contribute those to make it far more efficient. And also our purchasing agreements and our purchasing officers again enable us to be far more efficient in spending our money and creating contracts and looking after those contracts. So well done, Simon Drew and team, and the CEO for encouraging a project management and a purchasing department to make it far more efficient.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that too. I think when I first became involved with 6 years ago, when I first came on audit and risk, one of the risks that was identified by the auditors was that we didn't have a good program work stream how to deal with a lot of our infrastructure, and actually in particularly Three Waters we didn't even have a full understanding of exactly what we had. And I think what's happened over the last few years, there's been a huge amount of work done in the studying the systems, understanding what's there, linking partial plans with other partial plans, and now with the budget that's been set by previous chief executive and this current chief executive, we've got to the stage where we're consistently spending a whole lot more money, and figures like that we're spending 110 million thus far, you know, it's amounts that were hardly imaginable a few years ago unless you were spending something massive like the stadium. But the CapEx spends are just quite, and that's on renewals as well, but it's just quite outstanding. And I think we saw it, or we're starting to see the trend, and we saw yesterday in infrastructure that some of these things now we're doing more planned maintenance and less reactive things are breaking maintenance, and I think that's a really good space to be in. So, Councillor O'Malley.
Just feel obliged to speak now as Chair of Infrastructure. It is actually very impressive, and I think the Three Waters spend, you'll actually notice there is it's not a perverse outcome, but it is an outcome in transport spend, which is that we're still having to build up the capacity in the city. So while the Three Waters spend is getting better, you can see it's had an impact on the transport spend. I know that the infrastructure team is now looking on how to address that as we go forward. So it's just been a long journey to get to this point, and I just will continue thanking that team, as everybody else has, for getting us here. But that's largely why the transport spend is where it is, because the Three Waters has been so successful.
Councillor Geary.
Yes, I just wanted to say one short thing, and that was, I absolutely hear what you say, Chair, around spending the money, but less people in the community would think that that's all it's about. It's about getting things done, and that's been typified in recent times of completing and getting things done that benefit our community.
Whoops, I have no other speakers, so I will put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against? That's carried, thank you. Now, Mr Davey is not here today to talk about the Waipori Fund, so Gavin is going, he's got all the capabilities to, I might add. He's going to speak to the Waipori Fund for the quarter ending 31st of March. So would you like to speak or just take questions?
Happy to take questions, Chair.
Councillor Geary.
Thank you again, Mr Chair. Mr Logie, I have a question for you, and I just want assurance that the Waipori Fund investments don't include any in the company DGL, and you'll be aware that's the chemical company that's been in the media in the last week for the CEO's misogynist and racist comments, which have been absolutely disgraceful, and I just want to check that we have no investments in that company. That's my first question.
Again, I would have to look at that. I'm not sure of the ownership structure actually of that company, but we can have a look and see if we've got anything.
Thank you. And can we be assured that if a company that we have investments in was to act in that way, that our response as a council would be decisive and swift?
So again, one of the things we're doing as part of the development of the investment plan is to look at the SIPO, which is the objectives of our investments, and I think one of the clauses we may look at putting in there is to respond to that sort of question.
Thank you.
Councillor Elder.
As we all know, chairs at the moment are going through a rocky time to do with the world situation with COVID and the Ukraine war, but I see that our returns still track above the OCR CPI, and I was just wondering if you had any commentary about the world situation and our investment portfolio.
If I refer councillors to page 51, where the last comment that Mr Davies put in the report is the fund is positioned as a long-term investor and is diversified, so it is a long-term investment. Obviously, with the graph that they do on page 52, where we show the inflation-adjusted value of the fund, and so long as we're not taking dividends or cash out of the fund that reduces that below that level, then that's a sustainable investment.
Thank you.
Councillor Walker.
The synchronicity is fascinating. I was going to ask, in the context of war in Europe, COVID-19 and inflationary pressure, is it incumbent on us as a group of governors to remember that the Waipori Fund is a largely balanced and long-term investment? Thank you, Councillor Elder.
Any other questions? Do I have a mover? Councillor Walker's like to move. Seconded, Councillor Staines. No one wants to speak to it at all? I think all I'll just say is it's just like, as Councillor Walker's just told us via his question, that this is a well-balanced fund that's destined to last for intergenerational, and as a consequence of that, it's consistently performed on or about the benchmarks, so, and quite often above the benchmarks, so yep. No other speakers, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, that's carried. Now we're going to go to item 12, which is, got to find it, the supplementary, the companies, the annual reports for Dunedin City Holdings Group, the two missing reports. So, and Mr Logie will also speak to that. So
we just have apologies from the staff of DCHL due to illness and a bereavement. So I'm happy to take questions. So these are the final two reports. Councillors will recall that we presented the majority of the reports at an earlier meeting. These were the last two to be audited, so they have now been audited and signed off by the respective boards. So happy to take questions, and I'll attempt to respond to any should they come forward.
thank you. Who's got their phone on volume? The 24 pack. Any questions? I take it you've read reports and seen them. The report is for the Dunedin Railways Limited and the Dunedin Venues Management, so they're not actively large companies, but no questions? No? Nothing on screen? Okay, well I'm happy to move that we Note the reports of Dunedin Rails Limited and Dunedin Venues Management. There really isn't a huge amount to say about these companies except what's written on this on the agendas. Yep. Any other speakers? Anyone want to speak? No. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Oh, sorry, I need a seconder. I've got Mr. Staines over there. Thank you, Chris. Councillor, not Mr. Yeah, Councillor Staines. Thank you. You don't want to speak to it? No. All those in favour, please say aye. Those against, carried. Thank you. Now we go to item 13. Is that right? Got to find it. Here we are, 13. This is the Regional Council submission that was... Oh, sorry. No, the rail. Sorry. I've got to find which one does. 54, yep, sorry. No, I'm going back to my other agenda. Here I am. Okay, Dunedin Railways update on funding and operators, and we've got two staff speaking to this. We've got the Chief Executive and Mr. Logie. Questions? Or would you like to speak to it? Would you like to make some comments, Chief?
Just a couple, if I may, in part to respond to the Trust and some of the things they said during their public forum. We are actively working with the Trust, and as you'll see from our covering report, the current council resolution asks staff to bring a report back on the long-term operation and governance of the train, and that includes discussions with the Trust about what governance might look like and if they there is a role for them to play. But at this stage that report isn't complete and there's still more work to do, especially in light of the fact that you'll see there's a degree of uncertainty around a range of the costs. We still have uncertainty around what the nature of the service will look like. We've got the product development review that's underway. We've also got the destination plan. So there's a range of things that need to come together. And so that work, we are trying to progress it and hopefully have it that work completed by the end of this year, which is earlier than the council resolution had asked us to do. So we may be in a position to present some information to council for decision a year earlier than we had hoped. But that's what we're aspiring to do. But just so you know, the Trust are being actively engaged as part of those conversations.
Thank you, Sandy. Any questions? Councillor Barker and then Lafiso.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering, the request under urgency from Dunedin City Holdings Limited, did that come as a surprise, given that council had asked for them to carry on the service, the limited services until 2024?
Yeah, it was somewhat of a surprise, which is why we have provided officer advice, which is now our practice, on the DCHL report, because we don't believe the grounds for urgency were compelling and there's too much uncertainty with the information both in the DCHL report and then when we've looked at it. And Mr. Logie has detailed some of that in the report. There's a range of things that were counselled to consider that this was an urgent matter. There's a considerable amount of additional information we would need to try and find if you were to make a decision based on for us to be able to give you enough information to make a sound decision, because there would be budgetary implications and it would impact on the annual plan.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Fiso. Sorry.
Tēnā koe, Mr. Chair, tēnā kōrua. I'm coming from the for well-being's perspective. So I'm just wanting to be assured that in your discussions with the Trust that the retention of staff, but also on the ground and also the volunteer base, is that factored into the discussions?
Yeah, and governance arrangements through the chair can potentially be looked at on that basis. We haven't formed a fixed view yet and are looking at the 4 well-beings, because a service like the train potentially ticks all 4 of them.
Councillor Malley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If we were to just stay with the status quo, as you're developing the governance model, would there be a potential opportunity for a running model to be put in place for this current tourism year? That obviously you've got DRL run under DVML right now, and that's where the governance sits. Would there be an opportunity to set up a contractor relationship with OETT to take over the day-to-day running as a contractor, or at least some variance on that?
I'd have to give that some thought, because and I've scanned the track report that they've provided, which is a different document than the more detailed one that we have on the nature of the track, because there is still some health and safety risk potentially that would need to be managed. And where that risk still sat under a running model, I'd want to be comfortable about before we did anything, because ultimately it would either sit with DCHL or DCC, and so there are some challenges around that. So anything is possible, but that would seem unlikely, at least in the tourist season before Christmas.
So basically what you say is you would perceive some regulatory issues such as health and safety, which might mean that wouldn't be necessarily achievable.
What we have is information from that the business case and the track report that was presented by DCHL a while ago. I can't remember exactly, but others of you will remember. And now this from the trust, which don't seem to align. So now we have different sets of information about the nature of the track, and we'll need to consider what the trust have provided alongside the work that's already been done, and we're going to have to test where we think the accurate assessment lies.
I think that's 100% appropriate. There's a timing event, of course, and I think that one of the things that the Trust will bring forward in terms of their concerns is that the longer the train operates or sub-operates, the more risk of it going into a state of failure.
My sense is that the DRL through DCHL are applying the funding that Council has provided and are keeping the rolling stock and the line functioning, and I have confidence that they are doing that following discussions with Mr Cooper and Ms Adams. What I would also say is the proposal in front of you, the status quo does allow the train, the hibernated train, for want of a better word, to be geared towards the tourism season, albeit in a more limited way. So it wouldn't run trains every day, but the days the trains run could potentially be lined up with when there are cruise ships in town. May not be possible, but it's structured in a way that that would be the intention, would be to try and deliver a partial service to the tourists.
Councillor Walker.
Techie problems today. Thank you, Mr Chair, and thank you for the report. And I guess what I'm agreeing with Councillor Barker that this to me is ridden with uncertainty from start to finish. So my questions are related to that, I guess, and my old mantra, if you want to do something badly, rush it. So the uncertainty around, and I've contacted a number of people I thought would give me an answer around the potential number of cruise ships that would come in. We're completely uncertain about that, aren't we? Because I've heard numbers from 10 to 60.
Were you in touch today with the port? Someone was in touch. Someone told me today they'd been in touch with the port to try and gauge what they knew, and at this point we don't know. We simply don't know how many are expected. So further to that, and I think it's in part 27 of the DCHL report to us, where they're really pressing for a timeline in terms of getting that information out to the cruise market. So even if there were 100 ships coming now, those timelines are really tight in terms of getting that info. That's another uncertainty. That's correct.
Yeah, okay. Also, and I think it was mentioned by the Trust, if we were to run the service, which maybe if we vote on that today, fitting in the service to relate the service to the cruise ship timetable may be difficult if we're using Kiwi Rail lines because of their priority use of those lines.
It may be, but I've asked that question of DRL, and they say that there's a conversation to be had with Kiwi Rail about trying to link in, I think, especially to Thursday cruise ships, which may, and I'm no cruise ship expert, but that was what they suggested might be possible.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Geary.
Thank you. I'm sorry to labour the point, Chief, but as I was listening to the Trust, I was really pleased to hear their clarity about the uncertainty of cruise ships and the numbers. But when I read the DCHL report, when I read the report, there seemed to be, based on a premise that it was going to come back at volume, and also the idea of social licence doesn't seem to be entering into any of the considerations either, which I think is actually a really important point. What is your sense of those two things in terms of the report we've had? Because that urgency was linked to, in my mind, to volume.
Well, I think our recommendation is really clear. We think there is too much uncertainty at the minute for us to be able to provide clear officer advice for you to do anything other than that which you've already agreed to do, while we continue the work that you've asked us to do that will bring a holistic picture to you where you can make a decision in the round knowing all the information.
Thank you, that's very clear.
Mayor Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The bigger picture question is a strategic one around the assets and the rail corridor. But to make good strategic decisions, you need a good sense of what the detail might be, and that's been traversed by questions so far. And we also know from various built heritage projects that engineering can be as much of an art as it is a science in terms of what may or may not need to be done to bring an asset up to a safe standard. So, and I don't need an answer as to what those figures are, but I'm seeking, just asking really whether we have a sense of how we will go about ascertaining an accurate range of figures, if you like, for both at an asset maintenance and operating cost point of view.
So in terms of the asset maintenance, one option we've got is to actually do an early engagement with the contractor to actually go and look at actually run something up the track and maybe do a kilometre by kilometre assessment of what they think it would cost. And
you would do that with a range of people or just a person? I mean, I don't know how many people there are that are qualified to do this work, which doesn't help.
Again, we would need to go through a procurement process, but certainly there would be limited suppliers in terms of potentially it's Kiwi Rail and Fulton Hogan in the local market.
Okay, thank you.
And the nuance in that is this would be, and Mr. Logie and I talked about this during the week, these would be the people who would actually do the doing rather than enthusiasts who are passionate about train services, and they are different things. And so getting a contractor who would actually be the one who's required to fix the bolts or do the track things hasn't happened yet. And so that's the kind of approach we take for other infrastructure. We've been just playing with whether that might be the approach here.
Yeah, but it doesn't sound like you could get a structural engineer or equivalent and then get another one to peer review that.
The early contractor engagement type process works like that, so we would be able to do that, but it would be that would give us an entirely different way of looking at the maintenance required than has been presented so far, more in the PMO style that you're starting to see in those capital works that we've been showing you, where we do a high level assessment of what we think, and then as you get more detailed, you can then start to break it down and get more certainty. But you start with a big number and you refine it.
Councillor Elder.
Thank you, and thanks for the report and feedback. At point 11, detail needing clarification includes the following, and it looks to me like it's implying that we really need a really good business plan before we can actually make good decisions. Is that?
And so council has asked us to look at the management and operation of the train, and part of that will cover off all of this information, whether it's in a business plan or in a plan, or if it's something else, it would have the same effect.
And I was just wanting to note, there's also a business or evaluation on maybe a mixture of cycle and train or whatever that you're doing with the Otago Central Rail Tower, yes.
That work is ongoing.
Okay. So, and what's the process after this, and what's the timeline for it?
I think I mentioned the council has asked for something in advance of the LTP. We are trying to get something at the end of this year to provide some certainty, and if we can do that, that will give an opportunity for whatever outcome to take effect from 1 July next year.
Okay. Oh, thank you.
An aspirational target.
Councillor O'Malley.
Seeking clarity around, I think I heard what you said though. So one way to get a really clear answer on what it would cost to upgrade that line is quite literally put out a contract to do it.
To engage so early contractor engagement means we're thinking we'd like to do this, who would like to partner with us, and then you get the contractor and you agree, say, here's the scope of the work, and you get them to start looking at what it would cost.
And then they would effectively be putting in a quote which would be effectively the underpinning work.
Potentially, if we decided to then let it.
Well, then yes,
yeah.
but we would be really dealing with real numbers with the people who would actually do it.
Indeed. With all the caveats that go with the level of uncertainty there would be when you start a project until you refine it.
But we're no longer the enthusiasts or the disenthusiasts making
Correct.
the number.
And so,
yes.
but this is early in our thinking, but and again, finding folk who want to engage in a project like that potentially is challenging at the minute, given the from the previous report when we were looking at our capital delivery. This won't be easy. And there's a lot of work in the market at the minute, and whether people choose to engage with this, I suspect will be a challenge.
I think you listed the two main contractors. Of course, Dunedin Railways would be one as well with the track work, because they did track maintenance internally, didn't they?
Whether or not they have an appetite to engage in that process, we'd have to test that, and we haven't thought through what methodology we would use to attract contractors who might want to do the work.
Cool. Thank you.
Councillor Benson-Pope.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's following on from that, really. I'm not clear from what you said earlier and your response to Councillor O'Malley then, whether there's need for any further resolution or direction from us about obtaining that information one way or another.
No, I believe that the existing council resolution is broad enough that we can accommodate what we think needs to be done within that.
Okay, and that includes all the structural and technical issues around what the train sits on.
Well, we may not need to do that level of detail, but early contractor engagement hopefully will inform what we need by way of the operational model for the train, and that will include what maintenance is required.
Thank you.
Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a question. It's been great to hear the amount of questions about the clarity around the costs. And I was wondering, because there's a tourism infrastructure fund that morphs here and there every now and then, would it be useful to have those costs in case a fund came up that we might be able to ask for? And in that case, would it also be useful to look at the ownership model about who could apply, because as council often we can't apply for that, is that correct?
Yep, and that will be part of the work that is done. So accurate costs are useful for any range of reasons, for the people like the trust, for our governors, but also looking at other governance models, because if you were to change how the train is governed, whoever takes it over would want decent financials on which to be doing that.
Councillor Walker.
So certainly I'm going to dumb it down from strategic level questions to a much more basic question. And Councillor Barker, you might know the answer to this. Do we have stats on what percentage of each cruise ship partakes of the train trip? I'm sure we know that.
I'm sure someone does, but I don't.
Do you know?
About 30 to 50% of people do something that's bought through agents. So there was probably full train, maybe 400 people on a train.
Okay, it's quite small.
Yeah, often, I mean, mostly it was sold out.
What I would suggest, through the chair, if I might, at the next committee, I think one of the staff present will probably know that answer, if you were to ask Ms. van der Villiers.
Now, I have no other questions, I don't think. So, Councillor Barker had moved willingness to move this. I assume the recommendations. Councillor Raddick is saying that he is willing to second. Do you like to speak to it?
Thank you, Chair. It feels like we're relitigating, but revisiting this again. This is really just confirming our previous decision to operate and fund a limited train service until June 2024, and ask for a report back on the options for the long-term operations and governance. So, as the CEO said, she was surprised to get this under a matter of urgency. As council, we've shown our commitment for a long time to coming up with the right solution for Taieri Gorge Railway. And as it was brought up, there's the four well-beings also that this is really important for. We've invested millions and millions of dollars into looking after the railway. It's a huge icon and a hero product for the city. We've got the product development work, the destination plan work coming in, the rail trail, looking at all of those options there, and we need to make a long-term considered decision on this. As someone who's worked in the tourism industry all their life, looking at cruise coming back this season, that would be doubtful, unfortunately. And we also need to make decisions about where the train might focus itself on as well, because I think there was a big focus on cruise to the detriment of other parts. There were too many eggs put in that basket, and you buying more carriages rather than perhaps putting money into looking after the infrastructure. The staff report here also shows that there was a large number of details and matters needing clarification and consideration before the future of Dunedin Railways is decided. So it's sensible to go to option one, that we confirm our decision, and that we look forward to reports which will give us more information to make a long-term decision on the train. Thank you.
Councillor Raddick.
Yes, the train is a much loved feature of our tourism attractiveness, and when we consider the amount of money being spent on the railway station, it seems crazy not to have a train attending that station. So this, at the very least, keeps the train going up and down the main trunk line and possibly to Port Chalmers. So in the interim, it keeps it all running, and it's been shown to be sustainable just at that level. But ideally, it would be better if it could run up and down to Middlemarch, and only, deep, detailed investigation will be able to determine that, and possibly even then not determine it until we actually test it in real life. So we still need to undergo that investigation and get all of the facts or all of the projections lined up before we can make a decision about the future. So I very much support where we are at the moment to keep it all going and not let that train slip away. Thank you.
Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and not much to add to Councillor Barker's commentary, actually, but as I said earlier, if you want to do something badly, rush it, and I'm taking heart from the questions around the table that we'll probably move towards remaining with the status quo. And also mentioned, I mean, the whole paper is ridden with uncertainty, which, as a governor around this table, does make me nervous. I mean, if you've got a restaurant, you don't stock the food cupboards full of perishables without bums on seats, and I don't think this is any different. And not forgetting that the coastal excursions and the trip to Hindon, if I was arriving in Dunedin as a cruise ship passenger, are pretty magical, actually. So let's not forget that. We're looking at it through our lens, but I think if you travel somewhere else and you go up the coast, up to beyond Waitario and Oamaru, it's a great experience. So remaining with the status quo obviously gives us the best option to take a breath and get things right strategically for the long-term good for the Taieri Gorge Railway and for Dunedin ratepayers. Thank you.
Mayor Hawkins.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I can support these recommendations. There's a significant piece of work going on at a strategic level about how we might use the rail asset and how we might use the wider rail corridor. And I think the general sense I get is that there is a desire to retain a rail service, but also a desire to be open-minded about how we use the wider rail corridor. This report effectively is asking us to choose between two options. One is to stay the course and have that discussion, and the other is to preempt the outcome of that because the cruise ship industry has come knocking and asking us to scale up immediately for a season of unknown bounty. And as Councillor Barker has alluded to, one of the issues with the previous model was that effectively the rail company boxed itself into a corner by relying too heavily on the cruise ship market for business, which was all fine in the good times until that audience fell over and there was little left to support it. So, now that they are coming and asking us to jump, we shouldn't be asking how high, we should rather be asking why. And certainly I think given the difficult times that our local private tourism operators have been having over the past couple of summers, there's no harm over the next short to medium term of directing visitors, whether they're domestic or international, to support those private operators rather than one that is funded and quite rightly funded and propped up by a public entity such as this, because they certainly need the support at this point greater than this authority does, and so it's heartening to see the support for, I think, the only sensible option for us to pursue at this point.
Councillor Geary. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to be really clear and remind everyone that we are committed around this table to doing the best that we can around retention of the train service. I think we all acknowledge the iconic nature of it. We've made really sound decisions. We made those decisions to hibernate. We were very clear about it not being mothballed, which has other connotations, so that we could be prudent and careful in our decision making. I recall as a tour guide the times when I guided visitors to the city, overseas visitors who had just come from the train trip or were just going to the train trip in the other part of their day, and the delight that they had in that experience. So there's no doubt that scenery delights people, both local and international. And it will still be there, that scenery, if and when we bring the service back to go fully inland. However, there's so much we don't know, and the point I want to make is that, and I was very glad to hear the Trust confirm they understand that international visitors are not going to come back at volume, and we really don't know that we want them to come back at volume in the way they did, and we really are not sure that we want them to come back on the cruise ships at volume as they did. In fact, I don't think there's a social licence for that at all in our community. I was certainly hearing within our community and within the visitor community, those who service it, are feeling that we had reached our limit for all sorts of reasons, be it because of the damage to our environment, or the difficulty of coping with that in some of our heritage attractions where there's a limit to numbers. So I don't believe we've got social licence for that. I don't think we want to see that number coming back. And I heard a really interesting thing recently that I think kind of sums that view up, and that is high value visitors who have high values, and it's as relevant to this experience as others. So what we're trying to do here in supporting option one is to be responsible governors. It's not that we don't support this project going forward and the possibility of the return of the train in some form of a wider service. We've got an opportunity, as the Mayor described, of possibly some different products And I too believe, as Councillor Barker mentioned, that there was too much reliance on cruise ships before. We don't want to get in that position again. We saw during the trains, not planes, experiment, the engagement with local people, and I think that's something that really touched us and moved us all. So there are some pieces to the puzzle yet that we still have to find out, some of them being product development, but we certainly want to know some more about the tracks. And I look forward to getting that information for us as governors to be able to make some really wise strategic decisions for our community.
Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I want to actually thank staff for all the work to date, actually, and especially Mr. Christie and the economic development staff for the work they've done. The constructive interaction with OETT has been noted and appreciated by OETT. And also, we note that there's work still to be done on the destination plan, which will be an overarching piece of information that will relate to some of the strategic spending we've got to do. I'm very heartened to see the mechanism by which we're proposing to go forward with costing the proposed work. I think there's nothing better than asking a contractor what do you think it's going to be able to do it than any other way to find out what the answer will be. And then when we look at the operating models that we're running up to the outbreak of COVID, Dunedin Rail had moved itself over towards dependence on the cruise ship market, which some had referred to even at that time as potentially a cargo cult, in as much as you were putting so many of your eggs in that basket, and moved away from the local tourism and FIT target. And the summer experiment showed, in fact, how important that market is. And actually, that market is far more aligned to our well-beings than it is treating just the cruise market. And that was the original OETT model. My impression when we're looking for data on what was the breakdown of the passengers just before COVID is that Dunedin Rail did not have a clear understanding of exactly who those passengers were, so we may ask for it, but I have a feeling we won't find it. Going forward, I think there are two big questions then to be asked. What is the cost of the infrastructure renewal? And remembering that includes the maintenance, the rolling stock, and I've been told over and over and over by enthusiasts that if that stock doesn't roll, it degrades fast. So running services is part of the maintenance program there. And then the other one is the structure of the entity and the role that OETT will play in that entity. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Barker. No other speakers, was there? No. Councillor Barker, do you want to write a reply? Or?
Thank you, Chair. I don't think there's anything to reply to because I'm quite in agreement. I just wanted to touch on cruise, and again, I've been obviously paying a lot of attention because a lot of people are very keen to see cruise back. There's a lot of operators who relied on it and who enjoyed hosting cruise passengers, as I did myself. But there is concern about some of the bigger pictures, which government can hopefully deal with, as in the big cruise ships coming in and spouting smoke everywhere, which people are quite concerned about, and also how we host them, what sort of products we have, which is going to be really useful for the product development work. And also, hopefully, tourism is moving to that values-based model. We talk about high-value tourists, which is not necessarily actually social licensing acceptable as well. We want people who share our values and actually give back to the communities that they are coming and enjoying those social interactions with. Back to the train, that it's great that we would look to confirm that decision that we've already made, that we've already debated, to have the train running on a limited service, and that also that we continue on our investigations into what will be the best model for the train in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to put the motion. All those in favour, please raise their hand or say aye. Aye. Anyone against? That's carried. Thank you. Item 13, the submission. Ms. Wakaria, are you on your own? No, Gina? No.
Happy to take questions.
Happy to take questions. Any questions? Councillor Geary.
Mr. Chair, Ms. Waikawa, I noticed in the paper, and forgive me if I've missed it, so I'm really just checking in, there was nothing in the proposal, the annual plan, and therefore nothing in our submission around the harbour that I could see. Is that your understanding too?
That is my understanding as well, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Must be a good submission. Councillor Elder and then Barker.
I don't know what the process is, but I have submitted to everybody in addition to the submission, and I'm sorry for lateness, everybody, just around active transport, so putting it in the transport area, and I was just wondering, it's been sent round to everybody, and I was wondering what if I could get a seconder for that. Do I need a seconder, or do I ask Sandy, give Sandy the licence to? Because you know more than I do about this process.
Could I provide you a tiny bit of advice through the chair?
Sandy.
So I think first you need to determine if you've finished question time, because then after that we could look at the process whereby the committee could consider the amendment or not.
Oh, thank you, Sandy.
Councillor Barker had a question.
Thank you, Chair. It's a transportation question, so you might not be able to answer it. I just couldn't find the answer in the paper. In the ORC budget, it's great to see they have $1 million more for Dunedin public transport, but I couldn't see any detail about what it was going to be used for.
And sorry, Councillor, I can't provide you with that information, but I can get one of the Simon True to let you know.
Just through the chair, and just following on from what Ms. Ricardo is saying, do you have a recommendation or an amendment that you would like the money to be applied to something specific that you would like included?
I guess because it's 21 million, it's not obvious where it's actually spent. I was just hoping, wondering whether it was for bus subsidies or whether it's for improved service or anything like that. And I just couldn't see any detail, because I know we've been really strong on the bus service. Maybe we could commend them in our submission for adding $1 million into the pot for Dunedin public transport.
And then through the chair, that would need to be an amendment to the words that we have written.
Maybe we'll just say thank you later.
Can I just ask a question, Sandy? In some cases, we accept recommendations when we just get told, well, this will be added into the submission. At this point, is it too late to just make a decision to add extra words, or does it have to be by amendment?
You could do it by agreement before you move the substantive motion, or the report does provide me with the ability to make minor editorial changes. You could agree that, for example, you wanted a sentence, you directed me to add a sentence thanking the ORC for adding additional money for public transport, for example.
And that they apply it to free fares or something. Yeah.
Indeed, but we do mention at a high level this council's position to public transport is already covered, but at a high level, as ours is an exceptions only annual plan document, and so our response is necessarily at quite a high level because of the nature of their document.
So that's something to think about, Councillor Barker, if you want something tagged in there for a start. Councillor Mayor Hawkins.
Oh, thanks. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before we get too carried away with congratulations, it would be useful to know whether the increase in budget came with an increase in service, because it may just be that now that they're paying their bus drivers a living wage, that the existing service as it exists is more expensive. I wanted to ask a question, as futile as it may be, about reiterating points that we have previously made in submissions, thinking particularly about the fact that there's no budget for improved air quality outcomes, and our oft traversed position on governance of the public transport network, because we haven't really done that, and that's fine. But would those sorts of things, where they are existing council positions be difficult to add into the submission at this late stage?
No, they wouldn't. None of them would be difficult to add in, provided we had guidance. So, for example, if the committee wished to say something along the lines of that the submission captures council's current position on bus governance, air quality, that would certainly fit within that direction. We tried to capture at a higher level. We were aware of some of those things, but it's how much as officers you put in and how much we leave for you to provide some direction about what you want to see. Thank
you. And if you'll indulge me, I'm not sure who this question is for, potentially council's representative on the Regional Transport Committee, and it's apropos of the amendments that have been drafted and proposed as it pertains to the Regional Land Transport Plan. And my understanding is that the RLTP wouldn't cover networks that exist on private land in the way that a trail along stop banks might. Or is it silent on whether it can cover networks on transport networks on private land?
It's probably silent in as much as it would be more interested in regional networks per se. So it'd be more interested in end-to-end connectivity than it would be on the method by which you get connected. Yeah.
Councillor O'Malley, you had a question anyway.
Oh, it was actually just a suggestion somewhere in there, I think it was I've just gone away from the submission, point 21 I think it was, on public transport, saying we note the increased spending, increased allocation, and just leave it at that.
That would still leave you in the situation though, like the Mayor just referred to, increased spend might
yeah,
not
well, we don't know
anything.
enough to say much more than that, just we note it. And then
So
the next
maybe
sentence says, though, that we, I'll go back and find it now, therefore the need for an effective and integrated public transport network is priority for the DCC is the next sentence. So I feel that we kind of cover it globally. And I think catching Councillor Barker's point is, because Queenstown doesn't get it, which means it seems to be Dunedin specific. So therefore we note it, and I'm sure they'll tell us at the next Connecting Dunedin meeting what it was.
Thank you. Councillor Raddick.
Maybe I just can't see for looking, but it seems to me that on the budget, page 45 from the ORC, they've got a reduction in the budget for Dunedin public transport, and then down below in grants they've got an increase in about the same amount, $1 million each. So to me it looks like it's balanced out, so that there is no great increase. But I may be reading that incorrectly. Please illuminate me.
I'm sorry, Councillor, I'm not across that level of detail. I'm not sure if anyone else here is.
Is that the end of questions? We got any more questions? Councillor Geary.
Thank you. Ms Graham, I wonder if you could provide some guidance. Would there be value in noting the absence of an area of concern, such as a mention of the Otago Harbour? I mean, I think at this stage it's probably not the time, and we were talking about this yesterday a little bit in one of our meetings. It's probably not the time for detail, but just to note, because it's a gap. It's a glaring gap.
Look, I think this is your opportunity to raise whatever issues you think the Regional Council should be focusing on in their annual plan. And in the advice we give to submitters to this body, rather than acknowledging a gap, we always suggest to people that they acknowledge what we would like to see.
Okay.
Councillor Barker.
Just one question. I see that we have authorised the Mayor or his delegate to speak to the DCC submission, so could we put some of the points that have been brought up now into the oral submission? Would that be another way of doing it?
to actually submit orally to the ORC.
And if I might,
You might.
through the chair, I do try, when presented with the opportunity to speak to council's positions, to include a broader flavour of the discussion than is contained in the written submission. I can't guarantee that I'll always get all of it, nor all of it right, but that is always certainly the intention.
I'm at the stage now where I'm going to ask for some guidance. The circulated motion by Councillor Elder, it seems reasonably wordy to add all that in, and I'm just wondering, would you just pop that all in?
I'm happy, if councillors have seen that, staff worked with Councillor Elder to draft that in the style of the submission, so that each of those council can consider, or the committee, can consider, so that they're not too wordy at all.
Yep.
But it's just whether or not council agrees. And if I might, the other points that have been raised today were the committee to want, for example, to acknowledge the importance of harbour assets, for example. If they made a statement like that, staff, that would fit within the overarching delegation for me to come up with some words that gave effect to that. Likewise, pre-existing council resolutions, even if there were just bullet points, if council are happy, we can write it in the style of the current submission and have it included.
So I'm getting a nod from Councillor Geary that she would like that included. Councillor Barker, you were happy with just the sentence that Councillor O'Malley suggested, or you want more?
I believe the Mayor brought up that we don't know what the $1 million is being spent on, so can't keep... oh, wait, hand up.
If I could just
suggest...
Well,
I do know there's increased services to Mosgiel and increased services to Waikawa coast. So I know there are some increased services coming.
I think it would be helpful from a staff point if we could agree some high-level bullet points. Then and with the leave of the committee, we are happy to draft those in the style similar to what we've worked with Councillor Elder to draft, to give effect to what we've heard in the discussion here today, and then include it, circulate it, and then submit it on your behalf.
I feel that's an appropriate way. Is there anyone that has any dissent about anything that we've spoken about today? Is there anything that's offended anyone or upset anyone? No, Councillor Benson Pope's nodding his head, so that's a good thing.
All right.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, thanks. I need a more efficient model of this for this purposes. I left mine in the office. And broadly, the issues I want raised are previous council positions, and I don't think that's particularly contentious. Well, it shouldn't be, given that there are positions. But there is a point I want to include around scaling up the capacity of the bus network, which we don't have a position on. I'm happy to do that separately as an amendment. I'm equally happy to move the submission as it's drafted with the addition of both that and the points that have been made by Councillor Elder and the comments that have been made around reiterating council positions, and doing it as one singular and hopefully more efficient discussion, if that was the general will of the meeting.
I don't have a problem with that, and I think that's not inconsistent with the position that council generally have taken in the past. Yeah. Councillor Walker, do you have something?
I did, but I probably don't now. I was going to suggest in the German because we're getting, there's so much information flying, but I'm happy with the suggestion that's emanated from the CEO of everything that we're talking about is going to be circulated, which is much cleaner than me just, as I'm doing now, reading this late amendment. Thank you.
With the leave of the committee, I am comfortable that staff have captured what the Mayor has given effect, what he has articulated, which is the written changes, the high-level bullet points and the additional point the Mayor wanted to raise. We can capture that and turn that around pretty quickly.
Councillor O'Malley.
It does occur to me as I'm looking at the transport planning money going down and the fact that we actually did not have a very good regional transport plan put forward by the ORC this year, and in fact it was Environmental Southland that actually built the regional transport plan. that we may have a number of things we want to add in, because I think I now want to comment on the fact that the transport planning numbers have gone down, given that from the technical advisory group's perspective of the DCC, that they're not getting the support that they could be getting from the ORC. So if we're going to put these in, do we send them via email to everybody to look at? I guess that's why I like the idea of a workshop beforehand.
There wasn't time to workshop this one, unfortunately. The timeframes in COVID sometimes conspire against us just with availability. There is an ability to for us to submit something with the sign-off of the chair and then to retrospectively have the final version confirmed. And so that delegation exists because, so if there are changes that get added post this, you could delegate the chair or the mayor to sign off the final submission, subject to email circulation, with it coming back for just formal sign-off at the subsequent meeting. Because some of the changes that you're proposing, yeah, we have. Some of those changes sound more significant potentially than what the mayor was articulating if they are new positions. It is difficult, and so it's just staff can accommodate whatever process that you need, but there is the ability to circulate something by email outside of this meeting, get agreement by email, have the chair sign it off. All of that is within our delegations, and it's an approved process, and then we would bring it back for formal confirmation at a subsequent meeting.
I think there's no reason why that can't be done. I think that's appropriate, but I've got questions from Councillor Elder and Councillor Walker.
It's not so much a question as, I suppose, wanting to talk to the amendment that I have.
We're not there yet.
No.
Councillor Walker.
I probably should know this. I've been lazy not looking it up. But what's the timeline for this submission? And please tell me it's before the government's emission reduction plan comes out next week.
Thursday.
Okay, great.
We've got an extension because this was as soon as we could get it written and in front of a committee, and so we have an extension from the ORC.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Hawkins.
I've got no issue with the process that has been set up, but I would appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak to it in a public forum, which we wouldn't have the opportunity to, were it to be done on the papers and approved retrospectively. It's probably a question, a comment for you.
So I'm not sure. So you want to speak to that now or at a later meeting?
No. I mean, I would appreciate the opportunity for us to be able to discuss this in this forum in advance of the submission being made, even if we're going to follow a process where the final form of the submission is done subsequent to this meeting and then signed off formally at a meeting retrospectively.
Yeah, that can be accommodated. Okay. If any... I'm assuming when we come back as a council to retrospectively consent it, we're not going to do it that way now. Yep.
If I might, I think what the Mayor is saying is he would like the opportunity to debate the submission in whatever form this committee gets it to, subject to any amendments that staff then make for the retrospective approval. So it might be that debate simply notes the draft. So the recommendation might be notes the draft and delegates the CEO to complete in consultation with the chair the submission for formal sign-off. But that gives you the opportunity to have your debate publicly in advance of us submitting the document.
Yep. No, look, well, that sounds right. And you're confident with what you've heard today that you can add the appropriate things, because it sounds like Councillor Elder wants to do the same thing?
Well, the debate will certainly help us ensure that we capture the flavour of the submission appropriately.
Yep. Okay, we've got the mayor moving, and we've got Christine Geary is seconding. So,
and with the leave of the meeting, could we have 5 minutes just to ensure that we have captured it correctly? So would we be able to request an adjournment just for 5 minutes to capture this?
Happy to move and adjourn it for 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Staines. All in favour, say aye. seconded. Okay. Mayor Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, I'll just bring the meeting back to order. We've got a moved and seconded motion, and it's on the board. Mayor Hawkins, would you like to speak to the motion?
I will. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and mostly to the points that are to be included. I've got no issue with the draft submission. It just needs a little augmentation, and certainly keen to reiterate our previous position on air quality. A reminder that there is no budgeted work for improving air quality outcomes in Otago until 2025 in the current Otago Regional Council 10-year plan, which is an absolute abrogation of their responsibilities as a core function to be improving environmental outcomes, and putting all that work on hold while they design a new plan and then not implement that until 2025 remains as untenable as it was the last time we raised it, with little success, but we can but try again. Likewise, the ongoing issue around public transport governance, but quite aside from my concerns about that from an integrated transport planning point of view, I have concerns about the flexibility of the public transport system to respond to funding being made available by government to encourage further uptake of public transport, which all of our strategies and objectives support, but it was disappointing when government announced that they were going to halve the cost of public transport fares, that the official messaging that came out of the Otago Regional Council was fares are half price now, but please don't use the bus at busy times, because they didn't have the capacity to deal with any new users effectively, on top of the well-used routes at peak times. Regardless of what you may hear from elsewhere, there are a number of bus routes in the city at peak times that are already at capacity, and to allow for more people to take up that option as commuters, which is what we want to encourage, there needs to be greater capacity in the network. And the best part of 3 weeks ago, I wrote to the chair of the Regional Council asking if government were of a mind to make the subsidy that is currently temporary permanent through the budget, what planning work was being done at the Regional Council's end to be able to respond to that by creating greater capacity in the system, and I'm yet to get a response. There's every sign that it will be an enduring situation through the budget this year, and we need to know that in the next financial year there is the capacity to be able to encourage our residents to use that as an option, and to take the pressure off the transport network, particularly at peak times. It's something we need to make more attractive for commuters, and the messaging effectively discouraging people from taking public transport as commuters was disappointing. Understandable. It's hard to scale up a system for a 3-month trial period, but we do need to know that the planning capacity and the delivery capacity can respond to anything that comes out of the government's budget and emissions reduction plan over the next couple of weeks, and that's what I really wanted to lean on in this case, and I'll leave others to speak to their fine suggestions. Thanks.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillor Elder.
First of all, apologies for my late submission. It's not ideal. I am aware that the Clutha Gold will reach Waihola in March 2023 next year. There is no safe off-road route from Waihola to Dunedin for those people who will be reaching Waihola. And these are people who are not lycra-clad road cyclists. They are often middle-aged. In fact, the average age of people who use the cycle trails is 55. And so this creates a safety risk for those who want to get from Waihola to Dunedin. I'm also aware of work being done on the coastal community, and they submitted to the annual plan about plans to go from Dunedin to Waikawa. And parts of that is taking an off-road route beside the main highway, which actually needs to be submitted to the annual plan and to the regional transport plan to be adopted. And those routes are between Waitati and Warrington and Karatani and Waikawa. These routes would enable school children to go to school. It will enable workers to go to work, for example, mainland poultry, and the people from the coast in Karatani being able to go backwards and forwards there. And it will enable economic growth and development. So I believe it's now time for the ORC to take an enabling stance and recognise, first of all, that there is a huge growth across the region in shared trails. And in fact, the users of shared trails is growing 18% year on year. That the ORC recognises that shared off-road trails, cycleways, provides the opportunity for safe, active transport, recreation, health and wellbeing, tourism and economic vitality for our communities, and that's well evidenced. That OIC recognise that often on-road routes create safety issues and off-road shared paths create safety. That means more people will use them. Our children will bike to school because it's safe, because mum and dad go, it's okay because my kid's not going to get run over. On the Taieri alone, there's been a number of incidents and accidents, and the one I can particularly remember is the principal at Brockville School having an accident on the Taieri Plain a couple of years ago. So I believe that the ORC needs to take an enabling stance for the development of off-road safe trails when it comes to the use of their lands and waterways, including the use of stop banks. And I put in Hawke's Bay Regional Council Trail Network because in fact it's got the largest network of trails on stop banks in New Zealand. In fact, it's about 200 kilometres, I think, of trail on stop banks using lime, broken down lime. And that the ORC support the growth of off-road shared trails across the region and in Dunedin at a strategic level through the Regional Transport Plan. And in fact, some of that work has been done, and I know that Councillor O'Malley, in fact, has been working on that with that group. But I think there needs to be a bigger piece of work and supporting the groups that are asking us to, in fact, expand our trail networks from Dunedin. So thank you, and thank you for their patience with this.
Thank you. Councillor Barker.
Thank you, Chair. I have to admit to a case of COVID fog in my brain and turn my bouquet into a brickbat on further examination of the figures. On page 45, it seems that Queenstown are the lucky recipients of an extra $1.6 million under their public transport system, and Dunedin did have a proposed extra $1 million into their public transport system, but instead are only getting $300,000 more than the annual plan last year. So it is of great concern that the proposed expenditure on transport overall is down $1 million. So we will take that bouquet and turn it quite into a brickbat. I support the draft submission changes that the motion about the draft changes, especially around the air quality. That was quite shocking to read that wasn't of high priority, given all of the COVID, especially in people's well-being and health. That was quite shocking to read that. And I agree with the extra submissions around the transport section, and that is something obviously that we're really concerned around, from carbon zero, from getting people around the city, etc., etc. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Geary.
Thank you. I endorse the comments of previous speakers, and they cover quite a wide range of points, but the point that I want to focus on is the absence of mention that I can see around Otago Harbour. And for many years, I, in a different role, lobbied the ORC in the absence of having a harbour master, the bylaws having lapsed, the navigation markers being out of kilter with what was there, and they have made some progress, but I find it extraordinary that in this annual plan there seems to be nothing. And the reason that it's important is because yesterday we discussed the fact that this organisation is going to be looking at the Otago Harbour Reserves Management Plan, which deals with harbour edge assets that we control. And this is another one of these situations where ORC has a role in the marine space, we have a role in the land, and then there's this very grey area on the edge where the two meet, where we need to collaborate. And we're going to need that collaboration when we do that piece of work. The other thing that I remind everyone of is that back in 2017, on the 16th of October, under the Heritage Festival, there was a very successful meeting, hui, of people who were interested in the harbour, 150 people, some of them representing other groups. And the outcome committed to by this organisation, the Mayor at the time, the ORC, Port Otago, and Mana Whenua were there as well, was the formation of a harbour stakeholder group in the near future. And I'm reading off the minutes, which I happen to be the scribe of. Neville Pete was the one sharing the hui. And this was a stakeholder group of land and marine-based stakeholders supported by lead agencies, DCC, ORC and Port Otago. And I note that two of those organisations under the ORC umbrella. So it's important that we raise this matter at this point, even though it's absent in the plan, because going forward we're going to need that shared vision and collaboration. And it's an area that we're going to need a shared vision on for the reasons I stipulated. And this is our jewel in the crown, and certainly progress has been made, but there is more to do. And people often mention it with the completion of the cycleway, both Peninsula Connection and State Highway 88. Focus on the harbour is going to be even more pronounced. So it's extremely important that it's mentioned, and I can see us expanding on that in the next annual plan, our submission to ORC's next annual plan, as we progress that work around the Otago Harbour Reserves Management Plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor O'Malley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just speak to my amendment. Transport planning sounds very boring, but transport planning effectively, the ORC, the regional councils are responsible for the formation of the Regional Land Transport Plan. And the last Regional Land Transport Plan we submitted along with Otago and Southland, I would argue was largely written by Environmental Southland. And actually I will mention specifically the work of Mr. Russell Hawkes, who did a fantastic job of putting together the general plan. Our technical advisory group, I think, only met 3 times to put that plan together. And when you go to the next page of the ORC's consultation document, it says, what's the purpose of the plan? Improving accessibility to transport and create more choice in how we travel, which is effectively where the public transport comes in. Reducing the impact of transport on climate change. Improving urban environments and public health, and reducing deaths and serious injuries. That office has been having its budget cut back significantly over the years, especially compared to 4 to 5 years ago. And I guess what I'm saying is, it's from my perspective as the Regional Transport Committee member for the DCC on the Regional Transport Committee, that it's underfunded, and it needs to increase its funding so it can increase its capacity, so it can actually address the questions that His Worship has brought up, because a lot of this is happening because there's no underpinning planning to support it. Thanks.
Councillor Benson-Pope.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just briefly, in support of the comments that have been made about the wider responsibilities that many people feel the ORC has that they're not giving it enough attention to. First of all, the harbour. Councillors will be aware that the reason the Otago Regional Council had the shareholding in Port Otago vested in it was because of the extensive quote, more or less, from the report of the day, the extensive responsibilities and financial cost of maintenance of the harbour and associated assets, not just dredging of the channel, which didn't happen for a long time, but the port company is finally doing the Victoria Channel, but clearly the opportunities that exist for joint work with us around recreational and other opportunities around the harbour are enormous, and I don't believe that the ORC has given that responsibility the attention, anything like the attention that it deserves. And I guess Councillor Gary's already detailed some of that. There has been some movement, but not enough. In respect of the air quality issue, I think it's an appalling abrogation of their responsibilities to the general health of the community and the community in the city, that work has been given such a low and such a distant priority. I'll make the observation that a similar situation occurred until recently with their responsibility for water quality monitoring. And as part of recent planning decisions, water quality, for example in Blueskin Bay, was only provided thanks to an operator who happens to be harvesting the southern clams in that waterway. That's been useful information to have, but it's information that should have always been peer reviewed and provided by the regional council, who has a responsibility in that area as well. I'm pleased to see there's been some movement in that regard, and that's great in terms of the water quality monitoring of waterways throughout the region, certainly long overdue, but nonetheless welcome. And I find it extraordinary that given the policy changes that have happened in that area, that similar decisions haven't been made around air quality monitoring, because we know how damaging and how much more acute the effects of poor air quality are. And given actually the work that we're all familiar with in those really bad airsheds, like Clyde and Alexander in particular, the fact that this work hasn't continued there either, let alone North East Valley and Mosgiel, is a disgrace, actually. The reasons for that we can all speculate about. One of them, in my mind, is the structural gerrymander that exists with the imbalance of rural-urban sourcing of elected members, but that's an argument for another day. But I would encourage the Regional Council to lift its act on the matters that I have raised, in particular the air quality issue and the harbour responsibilities, and I'm sure they will be more than adequately advocated as part of this submission, whether or not we get to present it orally.
Thank you. I have no further. Councillor Addick.
Yes, I can support these amendments in our submission because I think, that there are things that we would like to see the ORC improve. However, I think that in general it would be a far better thing that if we had regular meetings with our fellow councillors on the ORC where we could sit and discuss the various elements that each authority would like the other authority to do or engage with or discuss. And I think that would be a far better means to achieving the ends rather than this very combative stance that I'm now seeing come out in this public meeting. I don't believe that chastising colleagues in a different authority and brandishing sticks to beat them up over things that have gone down is the appropriate way to go. I think we should be discussing things.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
What's your point of
Councillor
order?
Raddick is misrepresenting the way that things were described in various debate.
I disagree entirely.
Hang on. There's a point of order in process. I'm actually happy enough to accept that point of order. I don't think anyone was brandishing sticks, so I think it was probably over the top comment, and I'd just like you to withdraw it and apologise.
Okay, I shall withdraw.
Thank you.
And sorry
And apologise?
for that. Sorry? And apologise, yes. Just calm. I doubt it. So, I don't think it's appropriate that we be chastising our colleagues in meetings such as this. I think we can discuss things in a much better fashion, in a collaborative and collegial way, by having regular meetings with them, and I think that would be a better forum than chastising them with comments such as we have heard today. Thank you.
Any other speakers? Mayor Hawkins, you're right to reply.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to review. I'm going to avoid the urge to get into a debate of etiquette and manners that has been raised just now. But I welcome the support of colleagues for the submission, and thank staff for the work in preparing the submission and the efforts being made to strengthen that, particularly reiterating our existing positions that have continually asked for the Regional Council to fulfil their statutory obligations, and I think refusing to fulfil your statutory obligations for a number of years is exactly what should be raised in a public forum, because people deserve to know the work that isn't being done on their behalf by their regional authority.
Thank you. I'm going to put the vote. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you. Now we come to item 11, which is notification of items for the chair. Are there any? Okay, well with that, I will just also give you an update on Doug. Well, I'll do it after I close the meeting. Close the meeting, so we'll have an adjournment, say 5 minutes before economic development to get the staff here. Thank you.